For the first time in 19 years, Jews could pray at the Western Wall, which you will see. But what those first paratroopers found there when they liberated the Western Wall was most depressing. Jordan had turned Judaism's most sacred site into a filthy slum. Jordanian soldiers had desecrated the sacred Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives, which you will also be able to see. They had turned tombstones from Jewish graves into latrines for Jordanian soldiers. Immediately after the war, Israel offered to sit down and make peace with all its enemies. The Arab world met at Khartoum, capital of the Sudan, and responded to Israel's offer with a declaration history has called the three no's. There would be no recognition of Israel. There would be no negotiation with Israel, and most of all, there would be no peace with Israel. And that's the way it was for the next 6 years until 1973, when on the eve of Yom Kippur, Egypt launched a surprise attack. That was a tough one for Israel because she was unprepared. Israel's guard was down as the whole country had stopped for Yom Kippur. The costs of thwarting that invasion and ultimately winning that war were horrific. 2,000 Israeli soldiers fell in repulsing Egypt's sneak attack. Prime Minister Golda Meir took responsibility for Israel's lack of preparedness and resigned her post. The war taught Israel that she can never relax. What a sad reality that is. There have since been two major Arab uprisings, and to this day, Iran building its nuclear bomb, threatens Israel with it. Despite the strength of Israel's military, Israelis go to sleep every night and wake up every morning knowing that her neighbors want to destroy her. But as we say in Hebrew, af al pi chen, in spite of all of this, our covenant is two-sided. Israel exists, in my opinion, and only deserves to exist as a light to the nations, a bastion of justice and righteousness, as an example for others to follow. We cannot deny, nor should we, that the creation of Israel caused loss and displacement for many Arabs. I hope that reality will always sober us. I hope that reality will urge us, as Americans and as Jews, to urge Israel to make every reasonable effort to reach a peaceful accord, an accord that allows both the Jewish state of Israel and an Islamic Christian Palestine to live side by side in mutual harmony. When Palestinian spokespeople tell us that so many of their kinsmen lost their land when Israel came to be, they are 100% correct. But they do not tell us that roughly the same number of Jews fled for their lives to Israel from political, economic, religious, and physical persecution in Arab lands. And this is something that you need to know. While many of Israel's population are descended from Holocaust refugees, even more are descendants of Arab lands. And their mindset is different than our Western one, which calls for compromise, calls for reasoning together. They've grown up, and their parents grew up and tell stories of growing up in Arab lands where there is no gray. It's just black or white. They tried to take our land, we won tough beans. And that too is part of the issue in Israel today. But the difference between the displacement of the Arab population now, conveniently I would say, because nobody mentioned Palestinians prior to 1967, nobody complained so much when King Hussein thwarted an Arab uprising, a Palestinian uprising, by a vicious massacre, 10,000 people in the city of Hama. And then King Hussein said, well, maybe there is a Palestinian people, and I'm not going to have authority over the West Bank, which I've lost, any longer. And the whole Palestinian question has come to the fore. But the difference, and it is a crucial difference, between the very real displacement of many Arabs who did flee their homes in the war for independence. The Arab world, despite the vast, vast riches that it could bring to the task, kept those people as refugees in squalid camps, teaching hatred of Israel, so that little kids are taught math by problems like, if I'm sitting on a hill and 3 Jews are on the other side and I shoot 2 of them, how many are left? This is not a joke. This is not something that is unreal, but this is something that we're not aware of. These kids go to terrorist camps, and you can see the films of them at 5 years old learning how to crawl under barbed wire with their fake machine guns. But the difference is a crucial difference. Israel, at that time, with very limited resources, absorbed refugees from Yemen, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Morocco, and integrated them into Israeli society by providing them with language training, job skills, and housing. The Arab world, despite capabilities, economic capabilities that dwarf those of all the Jews in the world, chose to maintain Palestinian refugees in squalid camps, which ever since have been breeding grounds for hatred of Israel and terrorism. Now, I don't believe that supporting Israel means that we should relinquish the right to criticize any policy of Israel's that we think is wrong. But none of us should allow our criticism to provide aid and political ammunition for those, Jews and non-Jews alike, who seek to destroy the Jewish state. We, and I ask this of you, must not forget that Israel lives in a very bad neighborhood. And we must never equate acts Israel undertakes to protect its people with acts that our enemies perpetrate to destroy our people. Finally, we must never forget that if the Arab states renounce terror, lay down their arms, and acknowledge Israel's right to exist, there will be peace. But if Israel lays down its arms or relaxes its vigilance, there will be no Israel. Is that me?
Yeah.
Getting the message. You gotta be kidding me. So, with that background, Israel is a vigorous democracy, and the Arab citizens of Israel have the right to vote and participate. And there are Arab university presidents of Israeli universities in Haifa. Arabs have sat on Israel's Supreme Court, and Arabs do sit in the Knesset. I am not going to say to you that Arabs have the same rights and prerogatives of Jews in this Jewish state. as the Jews do. But I'm certainly going to say they have more rights than Jews have today in Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Syria, all the Arab countries from which Jews left with the shirts on their backs and were embraced by Israel. The other factor to consider is that in the early 90s, another Jewish dream came true. The dream that the Jews of the former Soviet Union would be free. And many of them flooded Israel's shores. In absorbing that population. I really can't talk now, I'm in the middle of a class. In absorbing that population, Israel accomplished a feat comparable to if the United States had within a very short period of time absorbed into our country the entire population of France. It is unbelievable. And once again, housing, language, and job training. It was a sad time in Israel. It was a time of economic crisis. It was a time when I could be walking on a street corner in Jerusalem or along the beach in Tel Aviv and see symphony quality musicians playing for shekels that people would throw into their violin cases. But Israel did it. And today, that vast knowledge from those Russian professionals, scientists, and musicians now enrich the state. But again, Russians, and I don't like to say stereotypes, but are not used to the kind of compromise and things and that we Westerners are, and they also know how the Russians supported the Arab attempts to overthrow Israel, and they are among the hardliners today. So if Israel seems loath to make concessions now that it was willing to make in 1967, in 1973, in 2000 when Ehud Barak proposed a plan of peace that would give Palestinians their state and perhaps even more land than the West Bank encompass, because there would have been some trade-offs. Here we are. So, a short course in Israeli democracy. Israel is a country with one branch of government that governs, the Knesset. Knesset is Israel's word for parliament. Knesset is a Hebrew word which means assembly. Synagogues are called Batei Knesset, houses of assembly. That is the name of Israel's parliament. It is one house. We have two in the United States. One house of parliament, 120 seats. In order to form a government, a potential prime minister must garner the support of at least 61 of those 120 seats. In Israel's history since 1948, how many times has one party won the majority?
Zero.
You guys know everything. Zero. So, everybody has to try to cobble a coalition together and form a government. And that process, frankly, for me as a non-Orthodox religious Jew, has been catastrophic. Because every government has to get into bed, and Mr. Netanyahu will be pulling down the sheets with the ultra-Orthodox parties who claim, sure, we'll support you in terms of security and economy. What we want is control over who is a Jew, who gets to perform religious functions in Israel, like weddings and funerals, all of these things, and every prime minister candidate and prime minister who rules has succumbed to that. So, 120 seats, the magic number is 61. Those of you who know me know how long it took me to make this add up to 120. And there is a little fungibility, but let's assume for the time being that Netanyahu and his Likud party this time won 35 seats. the exact same number as the blue and white party, in Hebrew, Kahol V'Lavan. You may hear that name, headed by ex-chief of staff Benny Gantz. Now, Mr. Netanyahu has some problems. He is under indictment for some serious stuff. Financial crimes, corruption. It's not pretty. My personal opinion is, put him in jail. And currently, if he is formally indicted, a process that would take months, he would have to resign. But one of the things he will try to do is get the new Knesset to pass legislation saying something like no sitting prime minister can be indicted for anything.
Does that sound familiar?
I hope he doesn't succeed. Anyway, so we have the following parties, all of whom won the required 3.5% of the total vote to earn a seat in the Knesset. And so, Netanyahu, 35. Blue and white, 35. Now it gets interesting. You've got two of those ultra-Orthodox parties, and they have strengthened themselves. They now have 16 seats in the Knesset. That's crucial, because nobody's forming a government without those 16 seats. So our desire for a nice egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall, forget about it. Reform rabbis performing marriages in Israel, forget about it. In 1978, I had the privilege of being at a special ceremony on Mount Scopus. You could look out and see the Dead Sea from there. And at that ceremony, Alexander Schindler, then president of the Reform movement in American life, received the Solomon Bublik Prize for the highest honor Israel. They don't even award it every year, just when the occasion warrants. So Harry Truman got it, Chaim Weizmann got it, and now Alexander Schindler was getting it. A Reform rabbi. And I sat there at that ceremony, hearing the praise heaped upon Rabbi Schindler, and I thought to myself, if after the ceremony he wanted to go to the Hebrew Union College chapel and perform a wedding, he'd be arrested. That's Israel. That's Israel. Okay, now you have the Hadash party, which is a left-leaning party that would align with Gantz. You have Labor. That's interesting. Only 6 seats. Ladies and gentlemen, in every election before 1977, the election when Menachem Begin became prime minister, Labor was the coalition former. Laban was the party of Ben-Gurion. Labor was the party of Levi Eshkol. Labor was the party of Golda Meir, etc., etc., etc. That all changed in 1967 as the positions hardened in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. You have some other parties. These two are right-wing, Israel Beitenu, meaning Israel is our home, meaning not their home, which is sad for me. But they got 5 seats. And then you have a rightist Union Party, 5 seats. Then you have here an Arab party that got 4 seats, despite a lot of movement to keep Arabs away from voting. And you have Kulanu, which is very interesting, a centrist party that will join the coalition and give Netanyahu not 61 but 65 seats, or even 66, but they want to insist that if he is indicted, he has to resign. And the horse trading and the different things, because while these parties will join the coalition, there's all kinds of different little issues that could become bigger issues and break up the coalition almost at any time, meaning they'd have to call again for new elections. So what happens is now, in the face of these results, the Meretz party is a left-leaning party. That would probably be the party that I would vote for, only 4 seats, because they are in favor of equality, religious equality in Israel, rights, more rights for the Arab. I mean, all of the things that I believe in. And so with all of this, the president of Israel, a ceremonial office, has the authority to look at these results and say who's most likely to form a coalition. In this case, the results are pretty clear. Unfortunately, even though Gantz got the same number of votes as Netanyahu, or his party list, what happens is, each party, when you vote in Israel, each party submits a list of 120 names. And so the number, they each got 35 of those 120 seats elected. These will get their top 5 elected. So President Reuven Rivlin looks at this and says, okay, we'll say in the coming days, okay, Mr. Netanyahu, you were the winner. Gantz has conceded this. You have 2 weeks or a month or something like that to form a coalition. You get an extension if you can't do it in the right amount of time, 2 more weeks. And if that doesn't happen within 42 days, and I guarantee you Netanyahu will make it happen somehow, some way, he will become the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history. Understanding that Ben-Gurion, the founding father, and George Washington didn't say, oh, no third term for me like George Washington. He would have still be there if he was still alive, probably. So Netanyahu's political power is nothing to be trifled with. And his appeal. Now, make no mistake, this is a political statement, but I'll stand by it. Donald Trump gave Netanyahu this election. No ifs, no ands, no buts. Whether you agree or disagree, and I, in this case, happen to agree, by making Jerusalem the recognized home of the United States Embassy, whatever we think of it, there will soon be a statue of Mr. Trump in Israel. By giving Israel, by acknowledging Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, another boost for Netanyahu. Had it not been for Donald Trump, I do believe Benny Gantz would be the next Prime Minister of Israel, and that would have been a development. But there is no more canny politician, certainly in Israel, maybe not on the face of the earth, than Benjamin Netanyahu. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he is very, very, very smart. And the fact that he speaks perfect English, has been educated in the United States, has been a great boon to him. Plus the fact that his late brother is the fallen hero of the Uganda rescue when the plane was, the terrorists were, the Israeli hijacked E's were airlifted out of Uganda. Yonatan Netanyahu, older brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, was the only casualty and was the leader of that initiative. So Netanyahu's got so much going for him that make him, if you will, electable in Israel. But don't forget, Israeli politics, if you think people say bad things about people here, Israel, you ain't seen nothing yet. But this is the story. It is a messy democracy, often a dirty democracy, but this is a fair election according to Israeli standards. And there's very little dispute about that. So, that's the story on the election. I think that we're in for a very interesting trip. I certainly hope that you will be listening to the voices of the Arabs and their feelings as much as you listen to the voice of Israelis. And for me, the most important thing is the willingness and the desire, despite the many, many things that you hear about Israel in the press and in the media, to see it with your own eyes. It's a marvelous country, in my opinion. It's a miraculous country. And I think you're in, those of you traveling with us, for a wonderful experience. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
Steve, what rights, you mentioned that Arabs don't have in Israel, that you mentioned that Arabs don't have the same rights in Israel as the Israelis, as the Jews. Can you indicate the differences?
Sure. Out of security needs, Israel has built a fence, in some places a wall, that keep Arab neighborhoods separated from Israel, and they have checkpoints, and they have soldiers at that checkpoints. And there are things that go on at some of those checkpoints that are not pretty, not correct, not ethical, not right. But the needs of security are the justification, sometimes valid, in my opinion, often excessive. There have been incidences at airports where activists, and we saw a case in the papers very recently, who are involved in courses pushing equality and peace, have been intimidated and questioned and detained. It's not good in some ways in that regard, and it makes me sad. Yes, sir.
I'll address this to Pastor Danner. Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. I've always heard that title, and I don't know what he stood for, what kind of power he had, and that was someplace, I guess, in the mid-30s, and maybe through the mid-40s, actually.
Who is the Grand Mufti?
And why?
And why?
Yeah.
Of Israel, or not Israel, but Jerusalem, rather. Islamic leader. Bear in mind that in Islam, technically there are no clergy, although it is a spiritual position basically, but there are no clergy in Islam. Imams are not clergy in the same way that Jews or Christians would talk about clergy. The power there is inspirational. I mean, there's other power too, but the primary power is inspirational and a sense of providing direction and vision, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
But in addition, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem sided with the Nazis during the war.
Yeah, this is
and he
true.
had a home in Germany.
Right, yeah.
So clearly, among the Israelis, as far as historical perspective was, he was clearly part of the Nazi machine.
Yeah,
I'm
that.
sorry to...
No, that's okay. You're right, and those are important additions. But
Steve, I was just going to ask, are Arab Israelis, do they serve in the military, in the Israeli military?
They are excused.
Oh, they are excused.
The Druze in particular volunteer and are known, legendary in Israel for A, volunteering for all of the dangerous assignments, and B, their bravery.
Yeah.
So it's purely a voluntary on their part?
Right, but Arabs are not forced to serve in the Israeli army at all,
But they can serve in the Israeli
if they
army.
wish. Yes. Well, again, I think it's exciting. I want to again thank John for his very, very sober and very, in my view, accurate assessment of the very complicated history. If I say I could have talked for another hour, he could have talked for another hour easily, because it is complicated and there is so much involved. And hopefully you will begin to unravel, and I do mean begin, to unravel some of this if you go with us to see it with your own eyes. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you all.